Reputation is built in years, destroyed in seconds. Imagine that on a giant stadium jumbotron, every eye fixed on you. Now imagine you're a startup CEO, celebrated and powerful, and in a split second everything could unravel. Today, that's exactly what happened. On July 16th at Gillette Stadium in Massachusetts, the air pulsed with anticipation as Coldplay took the stage. The band's energy filled the crowd until a familiar ritual began: Kiss Cam. At that moment, the camera landed on Andy Byron, CEO of a rising unicorn company called Astronomer, and Kristen Cabot, the company's HR chief. They locked eyes, held hands, and in a heartbeat, their seats became the center of attention. A hush fell, followed by laughter and applause. Even Coldplay's frontman, Chris Martin, quipped, "Are they cheating or are they camera shy?" And the stadium erupted in cheers. What seemed like a playful stadium game split seconds later became a global spectacle. Within minutes, the video went viral. Hashtags like #ColdplayGate trended on Twitter, Instagram blew up, and digital news outlets pivoted to cover the clip. Thought leaders analyzed body language. Bloggers speculated motives. And the CEO's LinkedIn profile? Gone almost as quickly as the moment it captured. The explosion wasn't just about entertainment, it was personal, professional, and deeply telling. Andy Byron had built his reputation from the ground up, a visionary leader who helped Astronomer secure a $93 million Series C funding round, touching a valuation near $1 billion. Known for his analytical mind and charismatic pitch, he was the picture of startup success. Meanwhile, Kristen Cabot, hired in late 2024, had become the HR conscience of the company, credited for reshaping culture, especially after Byron's previous leadership stints came under scrutiny for being harsh. But that night, all of that swagger, strategy, and reputation was overshadowed by a fleeting moment captured in 4K. And as the clip roared across timelines and headlines, two questions emerged. 1. How did a 3-second kiss cam clip become a crisis? 2. Can a human moment be worse than a calculated PR misstep? Today, we're going to unpack every layer of this story. We'll dive into the viral moment, the rise of Byron and Cabot, the cultural ripples inside and outside Astronomer, and the price of power when charisma meets exposure. And if you stick with me till the end, I'll share something that helps balance the outrage with insight, something you can see as a breather from the headlines. So let's hit play on the moment that stopped a stadium and watch how it rewrote a CEO's story. The footage is just 19 seconds long. It starts innocently typical kiss cam fare. The camera glides past a few awkward couples. Then it lands on a man and a woman sitting unusually close. You see their hands intertwined, her head tilting slightly toward him. They pause, startled by their sudden fame on the stadium screen. Then comes the recoil. That man is Andy Byron, CEO of Astronomer. The woman is Kristen Cabot, Chief People Officer of the same company. The moment they realize they've been caught, Cabot quickly covers her face with her hands and Byron shifts uncomfortably in his seat. But it's too late. The Jumbotron did its job. Everyone saw it, and someone filmed it. Within minutes, the clip is online. At first, it circulates in local Reddit threads and Twitter under funny moments from the Coldplay show. Then comes the wave. Wait, isn't that the CEO of Astronomer? Why is he holding hands with the HR chief? Then someone digs deeper. They realize that Byron is married with 2 kids. Kristen, recently divorced. And this wasn't just a date night. This was a public moment involving 2 high-ranking executives from the same startup during a romantic concert broadcast to tens of thousands. What began as stadium banter becomes a scandal. Memes explode. One shows the caption, "Series C stands for cheating." Another photoshops Coldplay's Fix You lyrics over their faces. Elon Musk himself reacts to a parody apology tweet with a laughing emoji. Even Major League Baseball gets in on the joke. Seattle Mariners' social media jokingly offers to send their catcher Big Dumper to help clean up the mess. Suddenly, a romantic concert has turned into a reputational wildfire. News outlets pick it up. Business Insider, Page 6, Fox News, and countless tech bloggers cover the viral fallout. The term #ColdplayGate dominates trending lists for 24 hours straight. But the scandal isn't just funny memes and gossip. Something more visceral begins to emerge. Ex-employees start talking. On Reddit and Twitter, anonymous former team members come forward. They describe Byron as brilliant but ruthless, calling him toxic, explosive, and paranoid. They say he cultivated a culture of fear, that Cabot was his enabler in HR, and that the moment on the Jumbotron wasn't shocking but affirming. One ex-employee writes, "We always knew something was off, now the whole world sees it." For many watching, it isn't about the kiss anymore. It's about power, impulse, and the hidden dynamics behind closed office doors. People don't just see an awkward CEO, they see a man who represents something bigger, the image of a startup messiah cracked wide open on camera. And still, the story hasn't even begun to collapse. Because the internet may laugh, but investors and institutions, they remember. Before the kiss cam, Andy Byron wasn't just another tech founder. He was a symbol of the startup elite, the kind of leader journalists called visionary, the kind VCs bragged about backing early, and the kind employees quietly feared but followed anyway. Andy Byron became CEO of Astronomer in July 2023, taking over the company during a period of transformation. Astronomer had spent years quietly building open-source data infrastructure, but it wasn't until Byron arrived that the brand took on a new life. He wasn't just technical, he was theatrical. In meetings, he didn't just pitch products, he performed them. Investors described him as obsessed with precision, sometimes abrasive but undeniably effective, and the results seemed to back it up. Under Byron's leadership, Astronomer raised a $93 million series funding round in May 2025, putting its valuation somewhere between $775 million and $1.3 billion. TechCrunch called it one of the most under-the-radar rocket ships in data science. He spoke at conferences with a kind of Steve Jobs-like cadence, sharp suits, perfectly timed keynote slides, and one-liners that made LinkedIn light up. He was, in his own words, rewriting the infrastructure of analytics for the next generation. And he was proud of his team, especially Kristen Cabot. When Kristen joined Astronomer in late 2024 as Chief People Officer, Byron posted a photo of her on LinkedIn with the caption, "Thrilled to have Kristen on board to build a culture of integrity, intention, and intelligence. She's the conscience of Astronomer." To insiders, it was a curious line. The conscience? Was that a compliment or something deeper? Some now say Kristen quickly became Byron's inner circle, his confidant, his fixer, his mirror. She revamped HR processes, implemented DEI initiatives, and acted as a buffer between Byron's temperament and the broader team. They were spotted at multiple offsite events, always professional. But some say, just a little too familiar. Still, to the outside world, they were untouchable until July 16, because the thing about founders like Byron is their entire brand is control. Control over product, control over people, control over narrative. But that night, all of it slipped. It didn't matter that Byron wasn't arrested. He didn't break any laws. But he broke character. And in the world of venture-backed mythology, that's often worse. Startups aren't built on tech, they're built on trust. Trust that the CEO knows what they're doing. Trust that they won't become a liability. Trust that they won't confuse charisma for invincibility. And suddenly, after 3 seconds of stadium footage, investors began asking the quiet question no founder wants to hear: is this guy worth the risk? In any corporate scandal, there's usually one figure who plays the role of moral compass, the person expected to guide the organization through its messiest human moments. At Astronomer, that person was supposed to be Kristen Cabot. But this time, she was in the frame too. Kristen Cabot joined Astronomer in November 2024 as the Chief People Officer, a powerful role in a company with nearly 400 employees spread across the US and Europe. A former HR executive at SaaS and cybersecurity firms, Cabot came with credentials: strategic, emotionally intelligent, deeply trusted by prior leadership. She'd built inclusion frameworks, restructured talent teams, and had a reputation for being the adult in the room. To many, she was the perfect foil to Byron's intensity. And Byron seemed to agree. When she was hired, Byron wrote on LinkedIn, "Kristen is here to help us build not just a company, but a culture. Every org needs a voice of reason. She's ours." That sentence aged in unexpected ways. Because the woman once framed as the company's voice of reason was now seen whispering with the CEO on a jumbotron, mid-concert, in a pose that felt anything but reasonable. Let's be clear, there's no corporate law against two executives forming a personal relationship provided transparency, disclosures, and policies are followed. But it was the optics that set everything on fire. Cabot was the top HR executive. Her role wasn't just internal, she was the architect of Astronomer's ethics, hiring, DEI, compensation structures, and crucially, its power dynamics. For her to be entangled publicly in a potential relationship with the CEO triggered every uncomfortable scenario that modern corporate HR is trained to prevent. and the internet noticed. One ex-user wrote, "She's literally the person who would handle the sexual misconduct policy. How do you investigate yourself?" Others pointed out a broader problem, the imbalance of power. Byron, as CEO, controlled Cabot's compensation, bonuses, even board reporting. If the relationship was consensual, critics asked, could it ever truly be equal? Then came the speculation. Was this relationship known internally? Were HR processes ever compromised? Had any promotions, terminations, or restructures been influenced by this dynamic? No one had answers, but in the absence of facts, the public filled the vacuum with suspicion. To make matters worse, neither Byron nor Cabot issued any real statement. A parody apology post circulated online, written in the overly sanitized tone of tech PR, but it turned out to be fake. Still, many believed it, and the silence from Astronomer only amplified the chaos. Kristen's own digital footprint was wiped clean. Her LinkedIn was deactivated. Her Instagram, once public, was locked. No official statement ever came, not from her, not from legal, not from the board. That silence spoke volumes. In many ways, this wasn't just a scandal about infidelity or ethics. It was about what happens when the very people meant to uphold boundaries become the ones crossing them. Kristen Cabot had been the face of culture, and now she was the face of contradiction. And as her silence lingered, something darker crept in, because the loudest voices weren't just critics anymore, they were insiders. If you wanted to watch a company's reputation unravel in real time, all you had to do was log on to Reddit. Within hours of the kiss cam clip exploding, the scandal took on a life of its own. X was relentless. TikTok edits surfaced with Coldplay's Fix You echoing under slow-motion zoom-ins of Byron and Cabot's stunned faces. One popular meme read, "Series C isn't for capital, it's for cheating." And while the internet laughed, a much deeper and more dangerous current was building just beneath the surface. The ex-employees were watching, and they were ready to talk. On Reddit threads like "Our Tech Layoffs" and "Our Faux Moi," former Astronomer employees began chiming in. At first it was vague. "Can't say I'm surprised. Man's always been unhinged. HR covering for him is nothing new." But the comments grew sharper. Several described Byron as having a volatile temper, a god complex, and an obsession with control. One user claiming to be part of the engineering team before the Series E round wrote, "Andy micromanaged every data pipeline decision but ghosted people when they needed approvals for raises. Kristen ran culture but didn't protect anyone from him." Someone else added, "This is the most karmic thing I've ever seen." In the world of startup culture, where everything moves fast and is polished for LinkedIn, these anonymous comments began hitting harder than headlines. They didn't just paint Byron as a flawed leader, they framed him as a reckless one. And in that light, the kiss cam moment wasn't shocking, it was proof. Then, just to twist the knife further, a fake apology tweet began to circulate. It read, "I made a mistake and I'm working with my family and my company to rebuild trust." It was articulate, measured, and hit all the right PR notes. Thousands liked it. Elon Musk even replied with a laughing emoji, just as if to say, "You really thought this would work?" But it turned out the tweet was completely fabricated. Byron never issued a statement. Not publicly, not internally, not through legal. His silence and Cabot's became its own headline. Meanwhile, the Reddit AMA culture kicked in. Threads spun up theories. Was this a pattern of behavior? Was Cabot the only one? Were there past complaints buried under NDAs? The post went viral. Astronomer became the latest startup to experience what can only be described as a cultural autopsy in real time. People dissected Glassdoor reviews from years ago. They dug up old all-hands footage. Even investors began lurking on threads, unsure of what they'd signed up for. And while the internet piled on, Astronomer's real problem wasn't just the scandal itself, it was the sense that everything had been fake. The hyper-polished culture videos, the LinkedIn love letters, the founder branding. It all crumbled under the weight of one very human moment, impulse, caught on camera. Byron's persona had been one of relentless control, of curated precision, but in that split second of vulnerability, the mask slipped. And once the mask slips, it's not just ex-employees who see through it, it's board members, clients, journalists, and the VCs who once said, "He's the real deal." But now the question became, what deal exactly did they buy into? In the world of tech startups, the founder isn't just a leader, he's often treated like a myth, a visionary, a disruptor, a messiah in a hoodie, and few wore that costume more convincingly than Andy Byron. Before the scandal, Byron was the golden child of deep data infrastructure, a niche space that typically lived in the shadows of flashy consumer tech. But Andy changed that. He made analytics sound revolutionary, sexy even. On stage, he wielded words like sovereign observability and orchestration control with the cadence of a TED Talk. Off stage, he charmed investors, dazzled clients, and inspired employees to believe they were building the next generational platform. This wasn't just leadership, it was founder worship. The psychology behind it is as old as storytelling itself. People crave heroes, especially in chaotic industries. They look for certainty, vision, someone to follow. So when a charismatic figure like Byron appears, articulate, decisive, successful, the myth builds quickly, especially when the numbers back him up. And that's where the triangle of power begins to form. In every startup operating at scale, there are 3 poles of authority. 1. The CEO, who owns the story. 2. The HR chief, who owns the people. 3. The media, who owns the narrative once it escapes the building. When all 3 are aligned, the myth thrives. But when all 3 collapse together, as they did at Gillette Stadium, the crash isn't just loud, it's radioactive. Let's break it down. And the CEO gets caught on camera, violating not just marital trust, but company-wide expectations about professionalism and power. The HR chief, the supposed neutral party, is part of the moment, not managing the fallout but causing it. And the media, no longer controlled by in-house comms or polished investor updates, seizes on the scandal like a slow-motion car crash. This wasn't just a personal issue, this was a structural failure. A betrayal of trust from every corner of the company's power model. Because investor capital doesn't just chase ideas, it chases certainty. And if your CEO becomes a punchline overnight, your term sheet starts to rot. This is why founder worship is so dangerous. Because when you build a brand around perfection, any human error looks like heresy. And once that illusion cracks, when the CEO is no longer seen as untouchable, when the HR department is seen as complicit, when the public feels deceived, you don't just lose control of the narrative, you lose the myth. And once the myth dies, the market moves on. But while the memes may fade, the consequences are just getting started. For a few days, the internet feasted on the kiss cam moment like it was entertainment. But in the cold fluorescent light of boardrooms and bank wires, the scandal wasn't a meme, it was a liability. Let's talk numbers. In May 2025, just 2 months before the Coldplay incident, Astronomer closed a $93 million Series C funding round led by top-tier VC firms. The round was meant to supercharge global expansion and solidify its reputation as one of the most promising companies in modern data infrastructure. Valuation estimates range from $775 million to $1.3 billion depending on equity breakdown and growth projections. The company was scaling fast, hiring engineers, courting enterprise clients, prepping for a possible acquisition or IPO within 24 months. And then, silence. After the stadium moment went viral, Astronomer didn't issue a press release. There was no leadership memo leaked, no acknowledgement from Byron. Kristen Cabot vanished from social media. The company's public relations team went dark. But the venture capital world doesn't need a statement. It reads between the lines. According to internal leaks posted anonymously on industry Slack groups, at least 2 firms began reconsidering their follow-on commitments. One senior analyst reportedly wrote, "No one wants to be associated with another WeWork moment." That wasn't an exaggeration. This wasn't just a personal embarrassment. This was an HR nightmare inside a funding deal. Here's why that matters. 1. Power imbalance risk. If an internal investigation reveals that Byron and Cabot's relationship violated company policy, or worse, wasn't disclosed during diligence, it opens the door to lawsuits, especially if any employee later alleges favoritism, bias, or retaliation linked to that relationship. 2. Frozen option pools. Employees at Astronomer receive equity. That equity's worth is directly tied to valuation and investor confidence. A scandal like this doesn't just hurt the CEO's image, it potentially decimates morale by making equity feel like monopoly money. 3. Internal whistleblowers. When ex-employees begin speaking out publicly, legal departments get nervous, but the real risk is internal. If current staff begin compiling stories, especially about toxic leadership, retaliation, or HR cover-ups, Astronomer could face internal investigations or external audits. 4. Clients pulling back. In B2B SaaS, reputation is everything. Clients who signed multi-year contracts under the assumption of stability may now pause implementation or delay renewals. In enterprise procurement, optics matter. No one wants to explain to their CFO why they chose the scandal startup. And here's the cruel irony of the startup world. You can build a $1 billion valuation on hype, charisma, and 5-year projections. But you can lose it all on a 5-second video. This is why optics isn't just PR jargon, it's capital. And when the CEO is no longer seen as the adult in the room, when the HR leader becomes the headline, investors do what they're trained to do. De-risk, quietly, quickly, brutally. They ghost your follow-up emails. They recommend taking a beat before we commit. They ask to revisit things in Q4. And just like that, the rocket ship slows down. For Byron, the irony couldn't be sharper. The man obsessed with metrics, with control, with forecasting, couldn't predict that his undoing wouldn't be a data breach or a missed quarter, but a camera at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with the wrong person. And while the public kept laughing, the business behind the brand, it began to bleed, quietly but steadily. Let's pause here, because it's easy to get swept up in all of this, the scandal, the tweets, the memes, the Reddit rage. It's easy to reduce people to headlines. It's easy to point, laugh, comment, and scroll. But there's something that often gets lost in the noise. Every story like this, every downfall, every viral clip is also a human story. Not just about power and perception, but about impulse, identity, and all the complicated ways we try and fail to be in control of our own lives. Andy Byron may have built a billion-dollar startup, but he was also a man sitting in a stadium holding someone's hand. Right or wrong, messy or misguided, it was a moment that revealed how little we actually know about the people behind the titles. Kristen Cabot wasn't just the HR chief. She was a human being suddenly thrust into the worst kind of spotlight, where every glance, every hand gesture, every silence is dissected by strangers with no context. And yes, there are consequences. Yes, accountability matters. Yes, people in power should be held to higher standards. But we also need to make space, in the midst of all the noise, to breathe, to remember that these stories we binge watch in real time are real. If you've made it this far and you're looking for a break from the headlines, a place where the chaos slows down, I want to invite you into something a little quieter. Gary Nguyen is a 29-year-old writer currently living in Silicon Valley. She spent the last decade writing about emotional truths, the kind of pain and resilience that doesn't make the news, but shapes real people. Since she was 17, she's published 13 books in Vietnam, including novels, short stories, and personal essays that explore love, loss, ambition, and the inner lives we don't show to the world. Her books aren't about scandals. They're about soul survival, what it means to keep going, to heal, to forgive, and sometimes just to sit with your own quiet questions. If that sounds like something you need today, you can find her work on Amazon. Titles like Just Hear Me Out or A Luxury Item Called Me. They're not here to fix you. They're here to sit with you. Because behind every headline, there's a human heartbeat. And behind every downfall, there's a chance to understand something deeper about who we are, what we fear, and what we choose when the world is watching. So let's take that breath. And then, let's look at what happens next. In the end, it was just 3 seconds. 3 seconds of eye contact. 3 seconds of clasped hands. 3 seconds of silence on a stadium screen. But in those 3 seconds, something cracked. Not just for Andy Byron or Kristen Cabot, but for every person watching who believed that charisma was the same as character, that power meant protection, and that reputation was armor thick enough to survive anything. It wasn't. What started as a joke on a jumbotron became a slow-motion collapse of a startup's identity. A CEO lost the myth of control. An HR chief lost the trust that held her position together. A company lost momentum. And the public, they gained something they weren't expecting. A mirror. Because what made this story go viral wasn't just the scandal, it was the recognition. We've all seen leaders who live by double standards. We've all watched people rise because they play the narrative better than they live it. And we've all learned, slowly, sometimes painfully, that the image is never the whole story. Byron's fall wasn't just about kissing someone he shouldn't have. It was about how we build up certain people so high that the only way to feel close to them again is to watch them fall. And that's the trap of founder culture, of celebrity culture, of any culture that values appearance over accountability. It tells us that as long as the slides are clean, the valuation's high, and the Twitter following strong, the human behind the curtain doesn't matter. Until he does. Until the curtain is yanked back and you realize that even the most brilliant minds can make the most reckless mistakes. That even the most composed leaders have moments of mess. And that sometimes the biggest threats to a company don't come from competitors, but from the people running it. So what do we take away from this? That startups need stronger ethical walls between power and HR? Yes. That charisma should never excuse bad behavior? Absolutely. That one viral moment can reveal everything a 100-slide pitch deck hides? More than ever. But maybe most of all, we're reminded that nothing, no amount of funding, no investor deck, no public persona, protects you from being human. And maybe that's the scariest part. Or maybe it's the most hopeful. Because when the masks fall off, that's when we finally get to ask the real questions. Not who got caught, but what was the culture that allowed it? What pressure was he under? And what does this say about how we lead, how we follow, and who we choose to believe? And maybe, just maybe, the next time we sit in a stadium and the camera turns our way, we won't just think about how we look. We'll think about what it reveals. If this story gave you something to think about, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you give Andy Byron a second chance, or is this the price of leading under the spotlight? Until next time, stay curious, stay awake, and never stop questioning the surface.